He was never meant to notice it. Not in that light. Not in that silence. And certainly not with the one partner who had never disobeyed him, until now. The snow had settled thick across the northern ridge, the kind that swallows sound and softens the world into something almost merciful. 8 inches deep, untouched except for the steady, deliberate prints of a man and his dog cutting through the white like a memory that refused to fade. Daniel Hayes moved with the quiet efficiency of someone trained to read terrain, to trust patterns, to move forward. His breath hung in the air in slow clouds, each exhale drifting away like something he didn't want to hold on to. Beside him, Shadow padded in silence, a dark silhouette against the snow, his coat dusted in frost, his amber eyes scanning everything and nothing all at once. They had walked miles already. No voices, no radio chatter, just wind threading through the bare trees and the faint creak of branches shifting under cold weight. It should have been routine. It was supposed to be routine. Then Shadow stopped. Not a stumble, not hesitation, a full stop. One paw lifted slightly off the ground, body angled forward, ears locked on something ahead. Daniel took another step before noticing. Shadow. The word came out low, calm. The kind of command that had always worked. Shadow didn't move. Daniel frowned, turning back. The dog wasn't looking at him. He was staring straight ahead, breath slower now, almost measured, like he was listening to something buried beneath the quiet. Daniel followed his gaze. At first, it looked like nothing. Just a shape. Half buried. Long. Still. A fallen log, maybe 10 feet out, its surface coated in ice, edges softened by the drift. It leaned slightly to one side, as if it had been there for weeks, maybe longer. Harmless. Ordinary. Easy to step over. Daniel exhaled through his nose, shifting his pack higher on his shoulder. It's just a log. He started forward again. Shadow moved, fast. Not aggressive. Not loud. Just enough to step directly into Daniel's path. Blocking him. That had never happened before. Not once in 5 years. Daniel stopped short, his boot pressing into the snow with a soft crunch. He looked down at Shadow, confusion tightening his jaw. Move. The word was firmer this time. Shadow didn't. The dog's body remained still, but there was something different now. A tension beneath the surface. Not fear. Not exactly. Something sharper. Something deliberate. His eyes flicked once toward Daniel, then back to the shape in the snow. As if to say, look again. The wind shifted. Just slightly. And with it came a scent. Faint. Almost nothing. But it cut through the cold like a thin line of memory Daniel couldn't place. Metal. Not fresh. Not strong. Just enough to register. Daniel's steps slowed. The world felt tighter somehow, like the space between sounds had narrowed. He studied the shape again. The way it curved. The way the snow settled along its edge. Something about it didn't sit right. Not wrong enough to alarm. Just wrong enough to linger. Shadow let out a low breath. Not a growl. Not yet. But it carried weight. Daniel crouched slightly, his gloved hand hovering near his thigh. He didn't reach for anything. Not yet. Just thinking. The silence pressed in. Even the wind seemed to hold back. You're seeing something I'm not, aren't you? He murmured, more to himself than to the dog. Shadow didn't blink. Daniel took one slow step to the side, trying to change the angle. The light shifted across the snow. The shape didn't change, but the shadow did. Just enough to reveal a line where there shouldn't have been one. Too straight. Too defined. Daniel's breath caught. Just slightly. Not fear. Recognition trying to form. He stepped closer. Careful now. Every movement measured. Shadow followed, but stayed just behind his leg, close enough to intervene, far enough to let him see. The snow crunched softly under Daniel's boot as he stopped a few feet away. The air felt heavier here, colder in a way that didn't match the rest of the ridge. He crouched lower, reaching out with the tip of his glove, not touching yet, just hovering inches above the surface. The world narrowed to that single point, that single shape, that single moment where instinct and logic no longer agreed. Shadow's breath deepened. Daniel hesitated. Then, slowly, he leaned in. Before we begin, tell me where are witching from. Drop your country in the comments. I'd love to see how far this story travels. Daniel's glove hovered inches above the frozen surface, his breath slowing as if the air itself had thickened around him. And for a moment he did nothing, just watched, just listened, because something in his chest was telling him this was not a decision to rush. Not here, not now. while Shadow stood rigid behind him like a silent witness to something Daniel had not yet earned the right to see. And then the wind shifted again, softer this time, curling low across the ground, dragging a faint whisper of scent that did not belong to snow or pine or cold air, something older, something out of place. And Daniel's eyes narrowed as he leaned closer, not touching yet, just studying the edge where the snow met the shape, because the line was too clean, too deliberate. And the longer he looked, the more it resisted the idea of being natural, like a story that almost makes sense until you read it twice. And Shadow let out a low sound, barely more than breath, but it carried a warning that settled deep in Daniel's spine. And still he hesitated, because hesitation had kept him alive before, because instinct was not always loud. Sometimes it was this quiet pressure, this weight behind the ribs that said stop, look again. And so he shifted slightly to the left, letting the light catch the surface at a different angle. And that was when he saw it, not clearly, not all at once, but enough to break the illusion. A subtle change in texture beneath the ice, a shape beneath the shape, and Daniel's jaw tightened as his hand finally lowered, the tip of his glove brushing the surface with the lightest contact, careful, controlled, and the ice responded with a dull, hollow sound. Not wood, not solid, something else. And he pulled back immediately, eyes flicking to Shadow, who had not moved, not an inch. His gaze locked forward, unblinking, as if he had been waiting for Daniel to catch up, to understand what he already knew. And Daniel swallowed, the cold air biting sharper now, because the silence was no longer empty. It was watching, pressing in from the edges. And he reached again, this time with more intention, using the edge of his glove to brush away a thin layer of snow, slow, deliberate strokes, revealing more of the surface beneath. And the color shifted as the white gave way to something darker, something uneven. And Daniel felt his pulse begin to climb, not from fear, not yet, but from recognition forming piece by piece. And then the snow slipped just enough, exposing a curve that should not have been there, too precise, too human in its shape. And Daniel froze, his breath catching mid-exhale as the world seemed to narrow again, everything pulling inward toward that single point. And Shadow stepped forward slightly, not to interfere this time, but to stand closer, his shoulder brushing Daniel's leg, grounding him, steadying him, as if to say you are not alone in this. And Daniel exhaled slowly, forcing control back into his hands. And with one final careful motion, he cleared a wider section, revealing what the snow had tried to hide. And the truth did not arrive all at once. It unfolded, quietly, undeniably, in the shape beneath the ice. And Daniel leaned back just enough to take it in, his eyes scanning, his mind catching up in fragments. Because this was not something you mistake twice, not once you have seen it. And the air around them seemed to shift again, heavier now, as if acknowledging that the illusion was gone. And Daniel's gaze lifted instinctively, not away from the shape, but beyond it, scanning the tree line, the stillness, the empty stretch of white that no longer felt empty. Because now there was context. Now there was a question that did not belong to the past but to the present. And Shadow's posture changed, subtle but unmistakable, his head tilting slightly, ears angling toward something deeper in the woods, something Daniel could not yet hear. And for the first time since stepping onto that ridge, Daniel felt it clearly, not confusion, not uncertainty, but awareness, sharp and immediate. That whatever had been hidden here was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of it, and somewhere beyond the quiet, something else was waiting to be found. Daniel did not move for several seconds. After understanding settled in, not fully, not cleanly, but enough to shift the weight of the moment into something real, something that could not be undone by simply stepping back. And the cold pressed harder against his skin, as if the mountain itself had leaned closer to watch what he would do next, while Shadow remained at his side, steady and unflinching, his presence no longer a question but an anchor. And Daniel slowly rose to his feet, eyes still fixed on the partially revealed form beneath the ice, then lifting again toward the tree line where the silence now carried a different meaning, not empty, not peaceful, but listening. And he exhaled through his nose, slow and controlled, the way he had been trained when uncertainty turned into something sharper, something that required choice instead of reaction. And his gaze moved methodically across the landscape, left to right, near to far, searching for disturbance, for anything that did not belong, because nothing about this place belonged anymore, not after what lay at his feet. And then he saw it, faint at first, almost dismissed as natural variation, a slight indentation in the snow several yards beyond the frozen shape, subtle enough to escape notice unless you were looking for it, unless you had been taught to read ground like language. And Daniel stepped carefully to the side, widening his angle, following the line with his eyes, and there it was again. Another mark, then another, spaced unevenly but deliberately, not covered by fresh snowfall, not softened by time, which meant one thing that settled heavily in his chest. They were recent, and Shadow's head turned in the same direction at the exact moment Daniel's focus sharpened, confirming what instinct had already begun to form, and the dog took a slow step forward, not pulling, not lunging, just aligning himself with the direction of those marks as if tracing a path only he could fully understand. And Daniel felt the shift inside him, the quiet transition from observer to participant, because this was no longer about what had happened. It was about what might still be happening. And he glanced once more at the shape behind him, the partial outline. Now unmistakable, no longer hidden, no longer ignored. Then back to the trail ahead. And for a brief second, he considered turning back, calling it in, letting distance handle what proximity could complicate. But Shadow did not move back, and something in that refusal echoed louder than any command Daniel could give himself. And so he nodded once, barely visible, more to the decision than to the dog, and stepped forward, placing his boot carefully beside the first indentation, measuring, matching, reading the depth, the direction, the story written in compressed snow. And the air seemed to thin as he followed the line, each step carrying him farther from certainty, deeper into something unseen, while the trees ahead stood still and silent, their branches heavy with frost, their shadows stretching long across the ground like barriers that did not want to be crossed. And Shadow moved slightly ahead now, his body low but controlled, ears forward, every movement intentional, and Daniel kept his pace measured, refusing to rush, refusing to assume, because assumptions had consequences, and the faint marks continued, leading not in a straight line, but in a subtle curve, angling toward a denser section of woods where the light dimmed and the snow lay less evenly, disturbed by wind or something else. And Daniel's senses sharpened with each yard, the quiet no longer passive but active, pressing against his awareness. And then Shadow stopped again, more abruptly this time, his body tightening as his head lifted slightly, nostrils flaring as he tested the air, and Daniel froze behind him, his own breath slowing, listening, not with his ears alone, but with that deeper instinct that had kept him alive before. And there it was, not a sound exactly, more like the absence of one, a break in the natural rhythm of the forest that did not belong. And Daniel's eyes narrowed as he focused on the space ahead, the shadows between the trees, the stillness that now felt occupied, and Shadow's gaze locked onto a point Daniel could not yet see, but could feel. And in that moment the realization settled fully, heavy and undeniable, that whatever had left those tracks had not simply passed through. It had paused, it had lingered, and it might not be as far away as he needed it to be. The stillness ahead did not break. It deepened, like a held breath stretched too long, and Daniel felt it settle into his bones as Shadow stood frozen, every line of his body drawn tight with purpose, his gaze fixed on a narrow gap between two frost-laden pines where the light dimmed just enough to hide detail, but not enough to erase presence. And Daniel followed that line, eyes narrowing, forcing himself to see past the shapes, past the shadows, to the small inconsistencies that did not belong in a place like this, because nature had a rhythm, a balance, and when something interrupted it, even slightly, it left a trace. And there it was, not movement, not yet, but a subtle disturbance in the snow beneath the trees, an area where the surface looked pressed down unevenly, as if something had stood there, waited there, long enough to leave an impression, but not long enough for the wind to reclaim it. And Daniel's breath slowed further as his mind began to map the space, measuring distance, angles, lines of sight. And Shadow took one careful step forward, then stopped again, his head lowering slightly, not in fear but in focus, as though narrowing the world to a single point. And Daniel felt the shift in the air, the temperature the same but the weight different. Like the moment before a storm when everything goes quiet for a reason, and he adjusted his stance, feet planted. Firmly, shoulders squared, not aggressive, not defensive, just ready, because readiness was the difference between reacting and surviving. And his eyes moved again, scanning the edges of that shadowed space. And then he saw it. Not clearly, not all at once, but enough to confirm what instinct had been building since Shadow first refused to move. A shape within the shadow that did not match the lines of the trees, too straight in some places, too deliberate in others, as if something had chosen that position rather than grown there. And Daniel did not step forward this time. He held his ground, letting his vision adjust, letting his awareness sharpen, and Shadow's ears twitched once, picking up something Daniel still could not hear. And that was when the quiet shifted again, not broken, but altered, like a thread pulled tighter, and Daniel's focus locked completely. Every sense aligned toward that single point, and the shape moved, just slightly, enough to separate itself from the background, enough to confirm that it was not part of the forest, and Daniel's pulse rose, controlled but undeniable, as the realization settled fully into place, that whatever had been here had not left, it had stayed. And it was aware, and Shadow let out a low, steady sound, not loud, not threatening, but clear, a declaration that he saw it, that he understood, and that he would not ignore it. And Daniel felt a strange calm settle beneath the tension, the kind that comes when uncertainty gives way to clarity, even if that clarity brings danger with it. And he shifted his weight slightly, not advancing, not retreating, simply grounding himself in the moment, because movement now would mean something, would signal intention, and Shadow held his position, unflinching, a line drawn in the snow between Daniel and whatever waited in the shadow, and the space between them felt smaller than it was, compressed by awareness, by presence, by the quiet understanding that this was no longer a question of what had happened, but what would happen next. And then the shape stilled again, blending just enough with the trees to almost disappear, almost, but not completely, because once seen it could not be unseen, and Daniel's eyes remained locked, refusing to let it fade back into assumption. And in that suspended moment, where neither side moved and the forest itself seemed to pause, Daniel understood something simple and absolute, that the dog had not stopped him back there because of what was in the snow, but because of what was waiting beyond it. And now, standing at the edge of that realization, there was no going back to not knowing the shape did not move again, but it did not need to, because now Daniel could see it for what it was, not clearly enough to define every detail, but enough to understand intention, and intention was what mattered most, and the air between him and that shadowed space felt charged, like a line drawn too tight, ready to snap at the slightest shift, while Shadow stood firm, his body no longer just alert but anchored, as if he had already chosen his place in whatever came next. And Daniel's breath slowed even further, each inhale measured, each exhale controlled, the way he had learned long ago when stillness was the only advantage left, and his eyes traced the outline again, forcing clarity from uncertainty, until the illusion fully broke, and what had seemed like part of the forest separated just enough to reveal the truth beneath it, a figure, partially obscured, positioned low and deliberate among the trees, not advancing, not retreating, simply watching. And Daniel felt the weight of that gaze even before he could fully meet it, because presence like that did not need movement to be known. It pressed outward, subtle but undeniable, and Shadow's low sound deepened slightly, not louder, not aggressive, but steadier, like a warning, spoken in a language only one side needed to understand. And Daniel did not raise his voice, did not call out, because sound would change the balance, would force the moment into something sharper. And right now, the edge they stood on was thin enough already, and instead he shifted his stance just slightly, turning his shoulders a fraction, making himself visible without advancing, acknowledging without provoking. And the figure in the shadows responded in the smallest way, a shift of weight, barely perceptible, but enough to confirm awareness, enough to confirm that this was no accident, no coincidence of paths crossing in an empty forest. And Daniel's mind moved quickly now, not in panic, but in calculation, mapping distance, terrain, options, while the cold seemed to settle deeper into his gloves, into his boots, into the spaces between thought and action. and Shadow took one slow step forward, placing himself just ahead of Daniel, not blocking him this time, but positioning, aligning, as if drawing a boundary that did not need to be spoken, and Daniel let him. Because some instincts were not meant to be overridden, some decisions had already been made in ways words could not reach, and the silence stretched again. But it was different now, no longer empty, no longer uncertain. It was filled with awareness, with the quiet understanding between two sides that had seen each other and chosen not to act, at least not yet. And then the wind shifted once more, stronger this time, pushing through the trees and carrying with it a sharper clarity, the scent more distinct now, the presence more defined. And Daniel's eyes locked fully onto the figure as it resolved just enough to remove doubt. And in that moment, something unexpected settled over him. Not fear, not relief, but recognition of a different kind. The kind that comes when a situation reveals itself not as chaos, but as intention waiting to be understood. And Shadow's posture softened just a fraction, not in surrender, but in certainty, as if whatever he had sensed from the beginning had now reached its conclusion. And Daniel felt it too, the shift from unknown to known, from question to answer, even if that answer was not simple. And he exhaled slowly, his voice still absent, his movements still measured, because sometimes the most important choice was not what you did next, but what you chose not to do. And the figure in the trees remained where it was, no longer hiding, no longer advancing, simply present. And in that quiet exchange, Daniel understood that this moment, this fragile balance, had been shaped long before he stepped onto that ridge, long before he saw the shape in the snow. And the realization settled deep, steady, and unshakable, that Shadow had not just stopped him from walking past something hidden, he had stopped him from walking into something waiting. The balance did not break, but it shifted, subtle and undeniable, like the slow turning of something unseen beneath the surface. And Daniel felt it first not in his eyes but in his chest, a tightening that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with awareness, because the figure ahead was no longer just present, it was choosing, and Shadow sensed it at the exact same moment, his body lowering slightly, weight distributing across his paws in a way that spoke of readiness without aggression. And Daniel mirrored that stillness, grounding himself, refusing to rush the moment into something irreversible, while the cold pressed in harder, biting through layers, reminding him that time was moving even if nothing else appeared to. And then the figure moved, not forward, not retreating, but turning just enough for the outline to shift against the trees, revealing a clearer form, a person, bundled in muted tones that blended too well with the forest, standing where no one should be standing, still as the landscape, but undeniably separate from it. And Daniel's breath slowed further, his focus sharpening to a single point, because now there was no question left, only distance, intention, and outcome, and the air between them felt narrower, heavier, as if the space itself was aware of what it held. And Shadow took another step forward, controlled and silent, positioning himself slightly ahead and to the side, creating a line that was both protective and deliberate. And Daniel let his hand relax at his side, not reaching, not signaling, just present, because presence carried meaning here, more than words, more than movement. And the figure remained still for another long second, then shifted again, a small adjustment of stance that carried weight, not aggressive, not passive, but calculated. And Daniel's eyes followed every detail, the angle of the shoulders, the placement of the feet, the way the head tilted slightly as if assessing, measuring. And he understood then that this was not coincidence, not someone lost or unaware. This was someone who had chosen this place, this moment, and had expected something to happen. And Shadow's low breath returned, steady and unwavering, not louder but deeper. And Daniel felt a strange clarity settle over him, the kind that comes when uncertainty gives way to truth, even if that truth carries risk. And he shifted his weight slightly, enough to show that he was aware, that he was not walking blindly anymore. And the figure responded in kind, a subtle stillness that spoke of acknowledgement. And for a moment the two sides simply existed, separated by distance but connected by awareness. And then the wind moved again, sharper now, cutting through the trees and breaking the fragile stillness just enough to change the rhythm of the moment. And Shadow's ears twitched, catching something new beneath the surface, something Daniel still could not hear, but could feel in the way the dog's posture tightened again. And Daniel's gaze flicked briefly to the edges of the clearing, scanning beyond the figure, because instinct rarely spoke in singular warnings. And there it was, not a shape this time, not a figure, but a second disturbance, faint and fleeting, deeper in the trees, something that shifted just out of sight. And Daniel's pulse rose, controlled but faster now, because the situation had changed, not in volume, not in movement, but in meaning, and Shadow adjusted his position instantly, angling his body not just toward the figure ahead, but slightly toward that second presence, creating a line that acknowledged both. And Daniel understood, without words, without explanation, that whatever this was, it was not contained to a single point. And the realization settled heavy and immediate, that the moment they were standing in was larger than it had first appeared, more layered, more deliberate. And as the silence returned once more, thicker than before, Daniel knew with absolute certainty that they had not just stepped into something hidden, they had stepped into something arranged. The realization did not come as a shock. It came as weight, settling slowly but completely, pressing into Daniel's chest as the space around him seemed to contract, no longer a wide, open stretch of winter forest, but something narrower, more controlled, like a corridor shaped by intention rather than nature. And Shadow felt it too, his body tightening further, not from fear, but from certainty, because the second presence was no longer just a possibility. It was real, it was there, and it was part of the same moment unfolding in front of them. And Daniel's eyes moved again, not just forward now, but outward, scanning the edges, the shadows, the subtle breaks in the snow and branches that might reveal what remained hidden. And the air seemed to shift once more, carrying with it a faint sound this time, so soft it could have been dismissed as wind threading through the trees. But it was not consistent, not natural. It came in a brief, controlled rhythm, like movement held back rather than released, and Shadow's head turned sharply toward that direction, confirming what Daniel's instincts had already begun to accept. And in that instant the fragile balance broke, not with noise, not with force, but with decision, because the figure ahead shifted again, more clearly now, stepping just enough into the light for its outline to separate fully from the trees. And Daniel saw the posture change, not aggressive, not retreating, but committed, as if whatever hesitation had existed was gone, replaced by a quiet resolve. And Shadow reacted before thought could catch up, moving in a smooth, controlled arc that placed him firmly between Daniel and both points of awareness, his body low, his stance unyielding, and Daniel followed instinctively, adjusting his position to maintain that line, not advancing but no longer passive, because passivity was no longer an option. And the space between them tightened further, every inch carrying meaning, every second stretching longer than it should. And the second presence shifted again, this time enough for Daniel to catch a glimpse, not a full shape, not a clear figure, but a movement that confirmed proximity, closer than he had hoped, closer than he had allowed himself to believe. And his pulse rose, controlled but undeniable, as the realization sharpened into something immediate, something that required action rather than observation. And Shadow's low sound deepened, no longer just a warning but a line drawn. And Daniel felt the decision settle fully into place, not rushed, not forced, but chosen, because whatever this was, whatever had been arranged here, it had reached the point where stillness alone would not hold it together. And he took a slow step to the side, changing the angle, forcing the moment to shift, and the response came instantly, the figure ahead adjusting in kind, mirroring the movement just enough to confirm awareness, while the second presence stilled again, holding position, waiting. And Daniel understood then that this was not chaos, not confusion. It was coordination, deliberate and controlled. And Shadow moved again, faster this time, but still measured, placing himself slightly forward, drawing the focus, breaking the symmetry just enough to create space where there had been none. And Daniel used it, shifting his stance, grounding himself, aligning his body with the new angle, because alignment meant control, and control meant survival. And the forest seemed to hold its breath as the tension reached its peak, the air heavy, the silence sharp. And in that suspended moment, where every movement carried consequence and every second stretched thin, Daniel realized with absolute clarity that this was the point where the story changed, not because of what had been found, but because of what had been waiting, and Shadow, steady and unyielding, had been the only reason he had not walked straight into it. The shift did not explode into chaos. It unfolded with a quiet precision that made it more dangerous than any sudden movement could have been, and Daniel felt it in the way the air seemed to loosen just enough to allow motion again, as if whatever had been holding the moment in place had finally released its grip, and Shadow moved first, not with aggression but with clarity, stepping forward into the space that had opened, his body still low, still controlled, but no longer waiting, and Daniel followed a half step behind, matching the pace, trusting the rhythm that had carried them this far, because hesitation now would only return them to the edge they had just crossed, and the figure ahead reacted in kind, shifting backward slightly, not retreating fully but giving ground in a way that suggested calculation rather than fear, and that single adjustment changed everything, because it broke the symmetry. It disrupted the careful balance that had been holding both sides in place, and Daniel saw the opening immediately. Not a path forward, but a narrowing of possibilities, and he angled his movement to the right, forcing the space to reshape around them, and Shadow adjusted seamlessly, maintaining position between Daniel and both points of awareness, his presence a constant line that did not waver, and the second presence shifted again, this time more clearly, stepping just enough into view to confirm its position, slightly elevated on a small rise beyond the trees, creating a layered distance that had not been obvious before, and Daniel understood then how deliberate it all had been, how the placement had been chosen to control angles, to limit visibility, to guide movement. And the realization did not bring panic, it brought focus, sharp and immediate, because understanding the design meant understanding how to move within it, and Shadow's ears flicked once, catching something new, something changing, and Daniel felt it too, not as a sound but as a shift in intention, like a current in the air that had begun to move in a different direction, and the figure ahead took another small step back, this time more decisively, breaking the line completely, and that was the moment everything turned, not with force, but with release, because the second presence did not advance. It withdrew, subtle and controlled, fading back into the deeper shadows beyond the rise, and the first figure followed, stepping back in measured increments, maintaining awareness but relinquishing position, and Daniel did not pursue, not immediately, because pursuit would mean stepping into terrain he did not control, and control was the only advantage he had left, and so he held his ground, watching, measuring, ensuring that the movement was real, that it was not another layer of the same arrangement, and Shadow remained forward, unwavering, his body still aligned with the retreating figures, but his posture had shifted slightly, the tension no longer building but stabilizing, as if the threat he had sensed from the beginning had reached its peak and was now receding, and Daniel exhaled slowly, the breath deeper than any before, as the space around them expanded again, the forest returning to something closer to what it had been, though never quite the same, because once seen, the pattern could not be unseen, and he took a cautious step forward, not in pursuit but in confirmation, testing the ground, the distance, the absence of immediate response, and when none came, he allowed himself another step, then another, until he reached the edge of where the figures had stood, and the snow there told its own story, compressed, disturbed, marked by presence that had been real and recent, and Daniel stopped, looking down for only a moment before lifting his gaze again, scanning the now empty tree line, and Shadow moved beside him, no longer blocking, no longer holding the line, but staying close, his head turning once more toward the deeper woods where the second presence had vanished, as if committing the direction to memory, and Daniel placed a gloved hand briefly against the dog's shoulder, not as a command, not as reassurance, but as acknowledgement, because without that instinct, without that refusal to move, none of this would have unfolded the way it had, and as the cold air settled back into its quiet rhythm, Daniel understood something that did not need words, that this had not been a confrontation meant to end in force, but a boundary revealed, a line shown, rather than crossed, and they had been allowed to see it, and more importantly, to step back from it. The forest did not return to what it had been, it only pretended to, settling back into its quiet with the same stillness, the same frost-laced branches and soft, unbroken snow. But Daniel knew better now, because once a place reveals its edges, its hidden lines, it never fully closes again, and he stood there for a long moment, not moving, not speaking, just letting the silence exist without, trying to understand it too quickly, while Shadow remained at his side, no longer tense, no longer holding the line, but not relaxed either, his posture calm yet aware, like something inside him had marked the space as changed, and Daniel's gaze drifted slowly from the empty tree line back toward the path they had taken, toward the place where it had all begun, and the distance felt different now, longer somehow, heavier, as if each step carried more meaning than it had before, and he exhaled. Slowly, the breath visible in the cold air, and turned, not abruptly, not out of fear, but with intention, because staying longer would not reveal more, it would only invite questions that did not need to be answered here, not today, and Shadow moved with him immediately, falling into step without command, his presence quiet and steady, the same as it had always been, and yet not the same at all, because now Daniel understood something he had not fully allowed himself to before. That trust was not built on obedience, not entirely. It was built on the moments when obedience was broken for a reason, when instinct overrode command in a way that could not be taught, only earned, and they walked back. Through the snow, their tracks were tracing a path that felt less like a trail and more like a boundary they were choosing to leave behind, and the air seemed lighter with each step, not because the place had changed, but because the distance had grown, and when they reached the edge of the clearing again, Daniel slowed, his eyes finding the partially uncovered shape beneath the ice, and he stood there for a moment longer, not out of curiosity, not out of hesitation, but out of acknowledgement, because that had been the beginning, not the cause, but the signal, the quiet warning that something beneath the surface was not what it appeared to be, and he did not step closer this time, did not reach out, because some truths did not need to be touched to be understood, and Shadow did not stop him now, did not block his path. He simply stood beside him, watching, as if confirming that the moment had passed, that the choice had already been made, and Daniel nodded once, a small, almost invisible motion, then turned away fully, leaving the shape behind, leaving the ridge, the trees, the unseen line that had been drawn and revealed, and they walked on, the sound of their steps soft against the snow, fading into the distance, until the forest swallowed them again, not as strangers this time, but as witnesses to something that would remain where it was, unchanged and waiting. And as the horizon opened slightly ahead, pale winter light breaking through the trees, Daniel felt the weight in his chest settle into something quieter, not relief, not fear, but understanding, the kind that does not come from answers, but from knowing when not to ask. And he glanced down briefly at Shadow, who walked beside him with the same steady rhythm, eyes forward, ears alert but calm, and Daniel spoke once, his voice low, almost carried away by the cold air before it could fully form. I almost walked past it, and Shadow did not respond, not in words, not in movement, but in the simple fact that he was still there, still walking, still choosing the path beside him, and that was enough. Because sometimes the difference between a story that ends and one that continues is not found in what is seen, but in what is sensed, in the quiet refusal to ignore the smallest signal, the faintest shift, the moment when something does not feel right, and instead of stepping over it, you stop, you listen, and you trust the one who sees what you cannot, and the forest behind them remains silent, holding its secrets, not out of malice, not out of intent, but simply because some things are not meant to be followed, only recognized, and left where they are a lone U.S. Marine and his loyal German shepherd move through a frozen wilderness where silence feels heavier than snow. What begins as a simple patrol turns into one of the most gripping animal stories when the dog refuses a direct command, sensing something hidden beneath the surface. As the Marine follows his partner's instinct, a buried truth slowly reveals itself, leading them into a tense encounter where presence matters more than action and trust becomes the only guide. This cinematic journey blends tension, loyalty, and quiet revelation, making it one of those unforgettable animal stories where instinct saves a life before danger is even seen. Through careful movement and unspoken understanding, The Marine and his dog navigate a moment that feels arranged rather than accidental, showing how awareness can change fate in ways logic never could. Unlike typical animal stories, this narrative builds through silence, atmosphere, and emotional tension rather than force, drawing viewers into a world where every step carries meaning and every pause reveals something deeper. The bond between the Marine and his German Shepherd stands at the center, proving that in the most critical moments, it is not commands but connection that determines survival. As the encounter resolves without chaos, what remains is a powerful reflection on intuition, trust, and the unseen lines that shape human and animal decisions alike, placing this story among the most profound animal stories that highlight loyalty beyond words. In the end, the Marine walks away not with answers, but with understanding and the quiet certainty that sometimes the smallest signal, noticed by a loyal dog, can prevent the greatest mistake, a theme that continues to define the emotional depth of truly meaningful animal stories. Character 1. White U.S. Marine male, age 35, realistic, rugged face, short military haircut, light stubble, wearing winter tactical gear, cold environment, front-facing camera, cinematic lighting, serious expression, no cartoon, no CGI, no illustration, high detail, sharp. Character 2. German Shepherd dog, age 5, full body visible, standing alert, black and tan coat, thick fur, amber eyes, muscular build, cold snowy environment, front-facing camera, realistic detail, no cartoon, no CGI, no illustration, sharp focus, cinematic lighting. 1. A dimly lit improvised field shelter at the edge of a snowy forest, cinematic realism. A white U.S. Marine kneeling on cold ground, carefully wrapping a clean bandage around his German Shepherd's injured leg. Warm lantern casting soft golden light against blue winter tones. Visible breath in freezing air. Marine focused and gentle expression. Dog calm, but tired eyes showing trust. Snow and gear scattered around. Intimate healing moment. Front-facing composition. Highly detailed textures. Natural lighting. Emotional bond emphasized. No cartoon, no CGI, no illustration, no cartoon. 1. 2. Early winter morning at a remote outpost. A white U.S. Marine in full cold weather tactical gear, standing outside a small barracks, tightening gloves and checking equipment, breath visible in frosty air, posture disciplined and composed, subtle fatigue in eyes. Background shows quiet base with snow-covered ground and distant mountains, cinematic lighting with pale blue sky, front-facing angle, realistic textures on uniform and gear, serious expression, atmosphere calm but heavy with experience. No cartoon, no CGI, no illustration, no cartoon. 1. 2. 3. A controlled training field under soft winter sunlight. A German Shepherd mid-motion running across snow-covered ground, while a white U.S. Marine stands behind giving silent hand commands. Dog focused with alert amber eyes and strong posture. Marine calm and observant. Interaction showing discipline and trust. Long shadows stretching across the ground. Crisp, cold atmosphere. Cinematic clarity. Front-facing perspective. Realistic fur. Detail and breath vapor. Emotional connection through training. No cartoon, no CGI, no illustration, no cartoon. 1. 2. 4. Deep forest standoff scene. Dense trees covered in frost. A white U.S. Marine standing still behind his German Shepherd, who is positioned protectively in front, both facing a distant shadowed human figure partially hidden between trees. Tension visible in posture, not aggression. Dog alert with lowered stance. Marine focused and cautious. Subtle second presence hinted deeper. In background shadows, cinematic lighting with cold tones. Front-facing composition. Highly realistic environment. No cartoon, no CGI, no illustration, no cartoon. 1. 2. 5. Wide cinematic shot of a frozen landscape. A white U.S. Marine walking toward what appears to be a snow-covered fallen log, posture relaxed and unaware, while his German Shepherd abruptly stops several feet behind, body rigid and refusing to move. Tension contrast between human calm and dog alertness, snow untouched and quiet, pale winter sky, long shadows, front-facing angle capturing distance between them, realistic textures and lighting. No cartoon, no CGI, no illustration, no cartoon. 1, 2, 6 close low-angle cinematic scene of the German Shepherd standing firmly in deep snow, muscles tense, ears forward, eyes locked ahead, visible breath in cold air, while the white U.S. Marine stands slightly behind with confused but attentive expression, subtle shift in tension, forest silent around them, snow texture. Crisp and detailed, front-facing perspective emphasizing emotional contrast, natural lighting with cold blue tones, highly realistic detail, no cartoon, no CGI, no illustration, no cartoon, 1, 2, 7 intense. Discovery moment. The white U.S. Marine crouched low, brushing snow away from a partially hidden shape beneath ice. Expression shifting from curiosity to realization. German Shepherd standing beside him, but looking past the ground into the distance. Body alert. Forest quiet and heavy. Snow scattering in foreground. Cinematic focus on hands and face. Front-facing composition. High realism textures and lighting. Emotional tension rising. No cartoon. No CGI. No illustration, no cartoon, 1, 2, 8. Cinematic tracking scene through dense winter forest, the white U.S. Marine following faint tracks in snow, while the German Shepherd leads slightly ahead, guiding direction, trees closing in with darker tones, light fading as environment becomes more enclosed, both characters cautious and focused, long shadows and layered depth, front-facing wide perspective, realistic environment detail, breath visible, sense of movement and tension. No cartoon, no CGI, no illustration, no cartoon, 1, 2, 9. Suspenseful mid-distance composition. The white U.S. Marine suddenly stopping while scanning the tree line. Expression sharp and alert. German Shepherd shifting body angle to guard two directions at once. Ears focused toward unseen presence. Snow disturbed lightly around them. Forest depth blurred behind. Cinematic lighting emphasizing tension. Front-facing angle, high realism and natural textures. Subtle unease conveyed through posture, no cartoon, no CGI, no illustration, no cartoon 1, 2. 10 high-tension cinematic frame. The white U.S. Marine standing grounded with controlled posture, shoulders squared, while the German Shepherd steps forward creating a protective boundary, both facing unseen figures within forest shadows. Environment feels compressed with layered trees and dim light. Breath visible, emotional intensity through stillness, front-facing composition, realistic textures, and lighting. Silent confrontation moment. No cartoon, no CGI, no illustration, no cartoon, 1, 2. 11 resolution shift scene. Distant shadowy figures withdrawing deeper into forest, barely visible between trees. The white U.S. Marine holding position without pursuit. Calm but alert expression, German Shepherd standing forward watching carefully until movement fades, snow lightly disturbed where figures stood, atmosphere releasing tension slowly, cinematic lighting softening, front-facing perspective, realistic detail and emotional restraint, no cartoon, no CGI, no illustration, no cartoon. 1, 2, 12 final cinematic closing scene. The white U.S. Marine and his German Shepherd walking side by side away from the clearing through soft snow, footprints trailing behind them, Marine glancing down at the dog with quiet understanding, dog calm and steady, forest behind remains still and silent, pale winter sunlight breaking through trees ahead, front-facing composition with depth, highly realistic textures and lighting, emotional calm resolution, no cartoon, no CGI, no illustration, no cartoon, 1, 2.